The song you just heard is another one of Sage Courageous's unreleased tracks. This one is titled Sonic Boom. As they are working on their newest album, feel free to go ahead and support them by listening to their last album, The War Within. They are a local band doing what they love, and I'm sure they would appreciate the support and encouragement from all of you the way you show it to me. You can find their music on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, really any major streaming platform. Thank you again to this band for allowing me to use your studio, and I hope all of you enjoy the episode. Hello everyone, welcome to the 5th episode of this season. The nature of this episode is a little heavier than some of the other content I have covered, probably some of the heaviest stuff I've covered since my episode with Maddie on addiction, but that makes it even more important. So my guest this week is Faith Conover, and she is going to share her story about what it was like to lose both of her parents between the ages of 10 and 12. So a lot of what we'll be discussing today revolves around grief and loss and suffering and trauma and coping. And I think that Faith's story is unique because she suffered such a great loss at such a young age. Grief is a really incredible thing. We see sides of ourselves that we never thought existed. We do things that we never thought we'd do. And each person handles their grief in a different way. So Faith's story is just one unique experience on suffering. And I'm very grateful for her willingness to be vulnerable with all of you. It's a delicate topic, so please receive it well and lightly. With that being said, Faith, can you briefly introduce yourself and then just, kind of share whatever details you're comfortable with regarding those days that you lost your parents?
Yeah. Hi. My name is Faith. I was born and raised here in Vegas. Pretty much, I'm 21. I grew up super, super religious, so both my parents were pastors. I was raised in a church, like the most religious, super healthy family. Everything was like organic, crazy, just like one of those families. I have 6 siblings, so huge family, all full. Pretty much, where to begin? So pretty much when I was 8 is when it started. We were actually on a trip in Disneyland, surprising my aunt. It was like a surprise party for her, whatever. Ever since I was little, my dad used to call me a watcher because, I was just, for a kid, I would pay so much attention to other people. I didn't talk a ton when I was little. I would kind of watch a lot of people and just pick up on things that were weird for a kid to be noticing about people. So we were at Disneyland. I noticed there was this huge dinner we had for our whole family. It was all my aunts and uncles, cousins, everybody. And I had noticed the demeanor in both my mom and my dad had kind of shifted. They weren't happy. They seemed very weird. And they were both people who, if they were arguing or there was something going on, we never knew. They tried as hard as they could to keep us out of it. So if you could tell a difference in them, usually it was something big. I found out later that day was actually a day they got a call. My dad had gone to the doctor, I want to say 2 weeks prior to our trip. And just for a normal checkup, he was having some weird symptoms, whatever. They called on that trip and said he had cancer in his mouth. So not a crazy form of cancer. Any cancer is bad, but they had said that the stage it was in, he only had a few months to live, which is a crazy thing to get when you're on a trip with all of your kids and whatever. He was actually a miracle case because he lived for 2 years after them telling him that. When he went in and got his treatments and things like that, it just started to spread. So if it had stayed in his mouth, it could have been contained. I think overall he had 4 surgeries to take it out, and they'd be like, oh, you're cancer-free, and then it would come back. That's just kind of how it works. Once it eventually spread to his lungs and his intestines, that's when it wasn't really treatable anymore. They just couldn't contain it. It was very weird considering the fact that both my parents were super healthy people. They didn't smoke. They didn't do anything. We were super healthy family. When I was about 9.5 or so about a year and a half after my dad was diagnosed, my mom got diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which at the time, multiple myeloma was a super rare form of cancer. It was super rare to be diagnosed with that. They were still trying to find different treatment ways and stuff like that. Nowadays, it's easier to treat, but at that time, there really wasn't much treatment for her. My dad then passed when I was 10, so my mom wasn't super sick yet. His passing was super out of the blue for me, not for everyone. I was only 10 years old at the time, so I thought we were just going to celebrate Easter with my dad. I grew up in hospitals and things because they were always in them. It's like we would go visit, and it was just kind of a normal thing to me. I didn't really realize, like, oh, this doesn't happen to everybody, you know what I mean? So it was Easter Sunday, and we went to church in the morning, of course. My mom did her sermon. We came back to the house, and all of our family was there, which was kind of odd. And then they were like, we're going to go spend Easter with Dad. And he was in a hospice at the time, which now that I'm older, I know the difference between a hospice and a hospital. Like, for lack of a better way to say it, pretty much a hospice is where you kind of go to die. Like, hospitals, you're still getting treatment. Hospice, they kind of know you're on your last days. So we went to go see him, and I remember walking out of the house. We had this next door neighbor who she would always come and watch us, and she was super sweet. And she had asked, like, oh, how's your dad? And I was like, he's great. And I saw her look at me and then kind of look past, like, my sibling or somebody behind me kind of shook their head or something, because I could see her face change, like, oh, okay, something bad's happening, you know? We still got to the hospital. I thought nothing of it. I had, gotten him this whole gift of, it's a very religious family thing to do, but I had gone in the Bible and if you look in a Bible in the index, you know how it says, like, all the different topics. So all the healing scriptures I had taken and written on a paper to put in his hospital room, thinking it would, like, heal him or something. I'm not sure. But we went there. My mom wouldn't let me in the room, so she put it in. Still have no idea. Everyone is very, like, down, but I'm thinking it's just because, it's a sad thing. We're sitting in the waiting room, and my little sister, I remember she looks at my mom and she goes, could this kill Dad? And she's the only one who's younger than me, so she was 8 at the time. And I remember looking at her like, what is wrong with you? Why would you say that? Like, and my mom then was kind of like, I need to talk to you guys. It was very quick. It was, you have to be in there, and this is the last time you're going to see your dad. And so as a 10-year-old, you're like, wait, what? Like, he's dying, and now I have to go say bye super quick. I don't blame her for that. She had 7 children that she's trying to figure out how to tell us our dad's dying. I don't blame her for how she did it, but it was a lot as a kid to be like, wait, what's going on? So we went in. I didn't say anything. I was just crying. I didn't know what was going on. And then that was kind of, he couldn't speak or anything. She was next to him kind of, mediating the situation. But after that was the last time I saw him. He passed. My mom was pronounced cancer-free 6 months after that. So she went in. We had like a whole party for it. She was cancer-free. It was a whole celebration. And then around the time I was about 11, she got diagnosed again. And that was when it really, like, took her quick. She was going back and forth to California for, like, the best treatment, the best doctors, whatever she could get. It was in her bones. So multiple myeloma starts in your bones. So pretty much, in essence, your bones are breaking because the cancer is weakening them. So she couldn't walk after a while. She had to be in a wheelchair. We had to set up a hospital room in the living room because she couldn't get up the stairs in our house. And I watched her fight a lot more than my dad, only because I didn't know my dad was dying. So to me, I was kind of like, oh, it's just Dad. Like, he has mouth issues. I didn't really realize what was going on. Where with her, I could kind of tell, okay, we're nearing the end here, When I was 12, that's when we said bye to her. I saw that one coming from a couple months away. So I got to kind of sit there and talk to her. She still couldn't talk, but she was looking at me. She could tell what I was saying, We all got to spend our time with her. And then, that's pretty much how it went. And then we kind of just did what we could from there. But, yeah.
Yeah. I just, cannot even wrap my head around it. Like, I don't even know how you did something like that. And for, you losing a parent in general is hard, like at any age. Even if they had like a long life and it's just like that time, like they're not, it's not sudden. It's like a natural aging process. Even that is hard. And then to go through it with something traumatic like cancer, right, where you have to watch it happen, and then to go through it twice, and then to go through it at that age, like it's just so, I don't get it. I don't understand it. It's honestly, I just, like, listening to it and hearing the story is really hard for me to wrap my head around. You know what I mean? So first and foremost, I'm sorry you even had to go through something like this, on behalf of the universe, whatever's responsible. But that is just such an early age to go through something that drastic, right? Like, you're still developing. Your brain is literally at that point where it's beginning, like, the most important part of its development. So do you think that there are still some ways that you haven't recovered fully from that? Or do you feel like, because there's no way to deny that it had to have affected your development psychologically in some way, right?
Right.
So do you feel like in the present day there are still ways that you are psychologically different because of that?
Of course. I think anybody who goes through something like that, especially in those early years, I think I'll always be somewhat affected. I think a lot of the negative ways I've worked hard to work through and let it not affect my life negatively. But of course, I think there's always going to be psychological elements, especially as a child. Your parents are your like foundation for your life, they're everything to you. So when I lost them, it was like a shake to everything, not to mention the religion we grew up in, that I was like, okay, who is this God that's supposed to be healing them? And like, as a kid, you have this very immature way of thinking, you know what I mean? So it's not as complex, and it's very like, wait, why are these things happening? It doesn't make any sense, So yeah, I definitely think that there's effects from that will probably be all my life, no matter what I work through or don't.
What, if you don't mind me asking, what religion are you, like, Christian, Catholic?
Yeah,
like
Christianity, yeah.
Christian. Yeah, that adds a whole other layer to things, because that is, I've mentioned multiple times on my podcast that I grew up Catholic, and there were a lot of things that sort of pulled me out of that. Like you said, when you're younger, you don't think as complexly. You don't ask super big questions. I mean, even as a kid, I still ask pretty big questions for my age, but,
right.
Not to the degree that I do now. So there were quite a few things that pulled me out of that. But one of the things that really shook me up was right after the Route 91 shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of already at a point where I had been, I went to a Catholic middle school, and then I went to a public high school. I went to Coronado. So I had been separated from religion, in that way. Because, when you're in Catholic school, it's every day. You're praying, you're studying it. So I had 4 years, and I was still briefly in contact with my church, and I got confirmed and everything. But I wouldn't say I was practicing. And then by the time I got to college, I was kind of like, all right, something feels weird. Something doesn't feel right. And the Route 91 shooting happened, and I was just like, I don't get it. I was like, everything that I've been taught about this God, about how the world works, how the universe works, why there is suffering, why there is all these bad things in the world, we get told the Adam and Eve story. Oh, all this bad shit is here because she ate an apple. All that stuff didn't make sense to me, right? Like, it wasn't good enough for me. And so, I see how that, losing your parents, like, and that happened to me when I was, 18, 19. So for something that jarring to happen when you're 11, and for you to make you question at 11, you know what I mean? Like, who is this God? What was because I didn't know that you were super religious.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your experience with God like after that? Like, did you still pray? Did you stop practicing? Were you angry?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, so if you think about it from like an adolescent point of view, right? To me, when I was little, I'm not thinking complexly of like, oh, there's this God and he's in this and there's that. To me, I'm like, okay, if I want something, I can pray for it and get it. That's the kid way of thinking of like, God heals, God does these things. So I was never scared my parents were going to die. because I was like, God's going to heal them. They're pastors. They do that. This is how I've been raised. Like, he looks out for his people, and he, you know what I mean? So when that didn't happen, I was kind of like, okay, with my dad, I was like, whoa, that was crazy, but he'll heal my mom. And then when my mom died, I was like, okay, what are we doing? Like, who is this guy that we're worshiping? And I was very angry for a kid when it comes to religion and things like that. I still went to the church. I was still on the worship team as my little self and like whatever, but it made me doubt a lot. But I didn't have the brain capability to really sit there and be like, what do I believe as a 12-year-old? You know, I'm kind of just like there going through the motions, whatever. It was really once I started to get older, so I would say like 15, 16, that the anger kind of came in of like, I'm not going here anymore. I'm not doing this anymore, you know? My uncle who took us in, he had made a promise to my mom that we would stay in church till we were 18. So I went for her and whatever. I wasn't really super involved. I would go. All the people in that church, it was still the church my parents started. So like all of them knew my parents and things like that. So I was always seen as a Conover and like Lori and Ed's kid. You know what I mean? So it was always this kind of a pressure of like, you need to be here, you need to be in this. So it was hard when you're questioning it to then go, but my parents would want me to be there. And, you know, once I started to really think for myself around like 17 or 18, I stopped going completely. I still don't go regularly. I am a spiritual person. I'm not a huge fan of organized religion. I think during that time, even take out the God not healing part, during that time, I saw a lot of people's true colors that were in that church and a lot of people who preach love and all these things and weren't really there. So that I was kind of like, okay, you know, it makes you doubt a lot of things. So to answer your question now, no, I'm not. I don't go to church every Sunday, but I'm somebody who believes I don't think you need to be in a building every Sunday to claim you believe in something. I think it's a personal experience, you know what I mean? So yeah, I'm definitely spiritual, but when it comes to organized religion and things, no, I'm not super into it, yeah.
It's crazy how many people that and it's out of coincidence, you know what I mean? Like, I don't intend to pick people to interview that I have the same beliefs
right,
as,
yeah.
you know what I mean? But it's just, it seems to be like a pretty common theme. I guess, you know, this is just my assumption with people our age that have grown up in an organized religion. They usually end up like, I'm going to pick and choose what I want about this, you know what I mean? Because I would say now, I don't know if I could say that I'm spiritual. I guess maybe I would say, you know, if I were to label it, which I hate labels, I hate even, you know, having to put a name to it. But if I were going to, I would say I'm more like agnostic, where it's kind of like I don't go out of my way to do like crystals or to do any type of like, I will say that for a while I stopped praying. Like after that Route 91 stuff and up until maybe this January, I didn't pray. I like didn't reach out or talk to anything. And I had some stuff happen in January where I was like, okay, I'm kind of scared now. So I'm kind of going to try this again and just see. And it's not, when I pray now, it's not even to a God, I guess. A God, whatever. It's kind of just me putting myself out there and being like, okay, well, if there is something out there at all and you can hear me, like, I need help with this. I'm not having a good time. And if you care at all, like, could you just kind of help me out here?
This out, right? Yeah.
I guess it's not even like, I mean, I guess some stuff is intentional prayer where I'm like, you know, look out for this person, help that person. But a lot of times I'm kind of just like, I'm hurting bad. So like, if this is what life is supposed to be, then okay, fuck me, I guess. But like, if it's supposed to be anything better, like, I'd like it to be better than it is now. And I've just seen so many people that come from organized religion that end up in this place where they consider themselves spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
I've said multiple times, if you go and listen to some of the other episodes on here, actually, I talk about how I'm not a big fan of organized religion. It works for some people. And that's great for them. You know what I mean? It's not like a judgment thing. It's just, I can't go back now. You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny. I think a lot of people, some people in the church and things like that are some of the most judgmental people I've ever met in my life. And that's not to talk for everyone. There was some amazing human beings in there as well. But I think a lot of people, it helps them feel better about their lives, you know? Course, and it's like, oh, there's this thing after my life.
Yeah.
You know,
and I'm not going to, I mean, I can't take that from them. I would want somebody to take it from me. And, you know, that, in my opinion, I had this conversation with my brother the other day. Saying you're an atheist, in my eyes, is kind of similar to devoutly practicing an organized religion, because both people are saying, I know something for sure about our creator or the lack thereof. You know, how can you say, I know for certain, for a fact, that there is absolutely nothing? Have you seen the entire universe? Have you seen, like, have you explored, like, the vastness of what is around us? Like, there's no way to do that as a human being. So I get that, like, oh, there's no evidence. Oh, there's no this. Oh, there's no that. Okay, but there's also nothing there's no evidence that says this doesn't exist, you know? On the other hand, you know, you have people saying, oh, I know exactly what's out there, and I know what it wants me to do. I know what it wants you to do, and I know what comes after this. Like, in my eyes, that's why I am where I am, because I'm like, nobody could fucking know. If there is something, it's going to be so expansive and so intense that I guess I can't say this for certain. Right. Because that'd be hypocritical. But in, like, what I think is, it would just, you know, if we came from it, I don't know if there's a way for us to ever fully know and understand what that thing would be. Right. You know?
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Yeah. So that was our little religious tangent that always seems to happen on every episode, no matter what I talk about. Okay, so I'm sure that you and a lot of other people have heard about, like, the 5 stages of grief. It's, like, a very common, it's, like, more like popular psychology. People have heard about it, even if they're not into psychology at all. You know what I mean? It's sometimes it's referred to as the Kubler-Ross model, because there's a psychologist that came up with it. And the 5 stages that it talks about are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it also says, like, these things aren't linear, so you can move back and forth, up and down. You know, it's not, you can go through a bunch of these multiple times before you fully heal. So do you feel like you experienced some of these stages? I mean, I'm sure you did, but maybe some more than the other. Do you feel like you spent a lot of time being angry or depressed or denying it, or, you know, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this kind of way of thinking that's like, oh, with time heals all, right? I don't agree with that. I think you can put work in to heal yourself. I don't think time will heal you, because, like you just mentioned, those things are linear. And in my own life, I've experienced every single one of them. You know, I've been in stages where I have peace about their death, and I'm like, I accept the fact that they are gone and I can move on with my life. And then 3 months later, I'm angry again. You know what I mean? So it's really just kind of a day-by-day thing. I don't think it's something that comes and goes. Like, you feel it, and then, okay, here I am, 21. It happened when I was 10 and 12. Like, I still feel those things the same way I did when they died. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, I think I felt every single one of them. I think, honestly, a lot of my childhood was denial. I don't think I really started to feel any of that until I got older and started dealing with my own inner issues caused by what happened. You know what I mean? I think a lot of my childhood, everything was very quick after they died. It was, within a month of my mom dying, I was moved in with my uncle, and we were packing up the whole house, and everyone was going their separate ways. And then I had been homeschooled up till that point. And then my 8th grade year, I was thrown into a public school. And, like, it was just a lot of, like, okay, I don't have time to sit here and, like, you know, deal with this stuff. So it was just a lot of, okay, go and get over it and move on, you know? Which, as I got older, I started to see that hurt or anger or whatever from that grief come out in other ways, in relationships, in friendships, in other things, because I had never dealt with it, you know? And it was nobody else's fault other than my own. So that's when I started to really kind of deal with it, and I think it makes it harder when you start dealing with it. The beginning of dealing with it is the worst part because it all starts coming up and you're like, oh, this is so much easier to just ignore, you know? But yeah, I would say once I started probably like 16 or so, that's when I really started to feel everything. But I think it's just something that you go back and forth on, and you find different things that bring you peace, and you just kind of learn to live with it, to be honest. Like, there is no real...
I think it's interesting that you said that you don't buy into this idea that time heals everything, because that's a really common idiom that's thrown out like a lot. People reference that a lot. And I think that part of what you're saying, though, still kind of falls in line with that, because how can you really heal from something like that? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't... I don't think you get to a point where it stops hurting. Like, that is something deep that was taken from you at a young age, you know? So, and, you know, you're still in your healing process, you know? So I think that what you were saying about how the beginning of dealing with it is the worst part, you know, because I've had, you know, different traumas, like different experiences in my life that I've had to deal with, where I remember being like, I can never get through this. Like, there's no way I can get through this. This is what the rest of my life looks like. And then you somehow do. Like, there just comes a day where you're like, okay, maybe it doesn't look like this. And that's what I think people cling to when they say time heals everything, because it doesn't take it away, but it's like maybe you get to a point where you're like, okay, I can get out of bed today. I can eat something today. I have this moment where, okay, maybe I can get up and go to the gym today. Whereas for the past week and a half, I couldn't. You know what I mean? So I think that that's interesting, because I think it's that phrase is kind of taken out of context, because there's some things that I agree that you don't heal from. Like, they don't go away. Even if you get stronger from it, even if you take something from it, it still took something from you that you don't get back. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is a scary thought. It's scary to think of. It's like people don't want to think that. People don't want to believe that there's things that you can't come back from, you know? So I think that it's kind of brave for you to accept that it's something that will always be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's almost easier, I think, to accept the fact that it'll kind of always be there, in the sense that when you have this thing in your head of like, okay, one day I'm going to wake up and it's all going to be fine, you can never really deal with your stuff in that moment. It's always, one day these issues will be done. One day I'll stop projecting this onto other people because it'll be healed in myself. You know, a lot of people turn to that of like, oh, one day this will all be easier. Yes, it gets easier, and you find coping mechanisms and things that help you kind of let out that energy and move on. You know what I mean? But it's never going to go away. So once you kind of accept that, and you know, like, that will always be part of my life, I will always have issues, or whatever you want to call them, caused by that. And I have to learn how to live with myself, and that's a part of me. You know what I mean? A lot of people, when something really traumatic happens to them, they're like, okay, now I have to move on and recreate myself. Which, yes, you grow, you mature, you learn different things, but that thing is always you. That's always a part of your life. You know what I mean? And if you can't deal with that being a part of your life, it's never going to be healed. It's always going to be there. You know what I mean? So,
right. Like that, like repressing it, basically, doesn't help you.
Exactly.
What were your thoughts, like, in the, like, you kind of briefly mentioned how you didn't really have time to stop and pause and be like, you know, contemplate it, and you contemplated it and dealt with it, like, years later. So I guess maybe not even, I mean, I am curious what it was like for you in your head when you're sitting there by yourself after stuff like this happened. When did you get to that point where you were like, did you get to a point where you're like, I can't do this, like, this pain is too much for me, I don't know how I'm gonna go on? Like, did you hit a point like that, or was it delayed, or like, how did that work for you?
Yes. So when I was younger, it affected me differently. It was, I would say, all of like middle school And even like my freshman year of high school, it affected me in the sense that I just felt different and like the odd person out all the time, because all of my teachers in middle school knew, right? Because I went to 8th grade 3 months after it had happened. So, and it was my first time in public school. So they had all been briefed on the fact that me and my little sister were like, coming here and our parents are dead, and like, be there for them, which is very sweet, and everyone was very sweet, but it made me feel very like, just don't talk about it. Like, I just want to come here and live without it being a constant reminder, I would go to my friend's house and see them with their families, and I always kind of clung to their families. I've done it my whole life. Like, whether it was a boyfriend's family or a best friend's family, like, I just clung to that element of like, okay, maybe if I'm just here all the time, they're my family. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how it affected me in that time. And I was able to redirect my thoughts to kind of like put energy into that. As I got older, that didn't really work anymore. I would say my like sophomore year is when it started to kind of stop working, because there was that element of like, these aren't my family. At football games, when I was performing with the dance team, I didn't have anyone there. You know what I mean? And my friend's family would be there and I'd be like, oh, they're here, but it wasn't my parents or my family. You know what I mean? So that's when it kind of started to hit me of like, okay, I am different. They're gone. This is hard. Then you're in high school. So, you have relationships and drama and everybody, you know what I mean? Just high school stuff that's normally tough for teenagers to get through in that time. So it all kind of hit me at once. My junior year was the hardest year of my life to this point. There was a lot of shitty things that happened that year, just at that school with people in that school, and just drama that's normal teenage things. But then I was dealing with a lot of personal stuff as well, trying to figure out how to deal with the loss of them and stuff, and who I was, all of that. And it pushed me into the darkest place I've ever been in my entire life. I stopped going to school. I would like drive there and drop my little sister off, and she would go in and I would just drive. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be around anybody. I was like ruining relationships, ruining friendships. Like I didn't want anyone, because I was then in a place of like, who cares? I'm going to lose them. So like, I don't want to be close to anybody, which is, not a great way of thinking, but it's where I was at. And I ended up isolating myself so much that I was just like, it doesn't matter if I'm here or not here, like nobody cares, which was not the truth at that time. But in my head, that was the truth. I then had all my siblings like, why aren't you in school? Your grades are dropping, you're this, so then I felt like I couldn't speak to any of them, because I'm like, every time I call you, you're asking me why I'm not there and why my grades are bad. Don't want to talk about that, So all the people closest to me, I really ostracized myself from. I didn't have any relations with them. My home life wasn't the best at that time. And so it was a very trapping feeling, and I just felt like it was never going to end. And I was like, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. And I actually, the end of my junior year, I genuinely felt like this is it. There is no coming back from this. I don't want to live this life without my parents. And I actually ended up trying to commit suicide that year. Thankfully, I have an amazing older brother, Ed, and he pretty much saved my life during that time. He was like my rock during all of that, and he would listen to me and whatever, and he just knows me very well. And he saved my life in that time and what was going on. Thankfully, I'm still sitting here today, and but yeah, that was the lowest point of my life. And I think it's when you're in that place, it's very easy to get trapped. It's very like, there's never going to be a better moment. And a better moment seems so far. You're out of energy. You're like, I don't want to put the energy in to tell somebody how I feel, because then I have to open up and cry. And I've always been somebody who's like, I don't like crying in front of people. I don't like doing any of that. You know what I mean? And then, like I said, my home wasn't a very safe space, so I couldn't really talk about it there. All my siblings didn't live with me besides my little sister, and I wasn't going to put that on her, So yeah, that was definitely when it affected me the most. But I'm very thankful that I had the support system I had in my siblings that kind of helped me through that time and get through it. But yeah.
So do you feel like since you went to that place, like you couldn't go back there again now that you've made it through? Or like have you had places where you've been like, oh no, like I'm going back here? Like is it like you went through the trenches and now you feel like you've seen the light, or is it something that you still have to be careful about and still battle like to this day?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question because I think it is something that I know if I let myself go back there, I can. But I think it put in perspective for me, like that's the lowest point in my life. And I now know some of that was self-inflicted. Some of that was me having victimizing thoughts towards myself of like, oh, your life is hard and this and that, So I don't think I would ever let myself get back there. I do think I could let myself get back into that spot. And I'll feel it sometimes, I'll feel little like moods and things like that are just normal, but I've figured out how to cope with them and get myself out of them. So I have like coping mechanisms that work for me. They don't work for everybody. I think it's a very personal thing of you have to find what works for you and what really makes you happy. For me, it was dance. That if I'm in that, sounds weird, but I literally just go dance for like 8 hours and dance it off. And then it's like, I'm okay, But everybody has different things. But yeah, if I let myself, I could get back there. But yeah.
What do you think were some of your like unhealthy coping mechanisms? Because I don't, maybe like ditching school made you feel better by not being there and not dealing with people. You said like isolating, but like what were some of the things that you did to make yourself feel better that you felt like were just like not healthy at all?
Lots of drinking and drugs. So I had friends who were very crazy partiers at that time. And in high school, you already come in contact with those people anyways. And I was just kind of like, cool, if it'll make me feel nothing, let's do it, which was another danger in and of its own. But yeah, I would say partying, ditching. I wasn't a bad kid by any means, but I just got to a place where I was just kind of like, what are you going to do? Like, you know what I mean? And I also think there was a level of me that wanted someone to watch what was going on. I wanted somebody to be like, Faith, are you okay?
Yeah.
And so I think part of it was me kind of lashing out to be like, hello, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also saw it in relationships and friendships where I would be so controlling of people. And so like, because I didn't want to lose them or I didn't want something to happen, that I would put these unrealistic expectations on people. And when they didn't meet them, I would be so upset and like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which was unhealthy. And, there was a lot of things, but I think definitely partying was a big one, very slippery slope with that. And there's addiction all in my family. So it's already like, very not a good path to go down for me. But
right. Yeah. Did you like see a therapist at any point during this time, or is it because you mentioned really quickly, that you went to live with your uncle. So how was that relationship there? Like, obviously it was different from what you had with your parents. How did that change like your daily life in terms of having like a guardian?
So growing up, my uncle was always like my best friend. He would come over and he was like the fun uncle because we were so sheltered. So like literally dessert was like trail mix because there's like a couple M&Ms in them. Like we weren't allowed to eat crazy bad food or like see scary movies or anything. And he was always like the uncle that would take us to those things and give us mac and cheese and stuff. It sounds so stupid, but like as a kid, that's what you're like, oh, I love you. You're so fun, So when we first moved in with him, it was fine. It was cool. I actually kind of liked it as a kid because, I was obsessed with Justin Bieber at the time, me and my little sister, and he got us this like whole Justin Bieber room, and like it was great. I was obsessed, and obviously for what the situation was. Then I think as I started to get older, you just start to like form your own life opinions. And I think when you're young, you look at family members as like the holy grail of like, oh, these are people who think a certain way. I have to think that way. They do these things. I have to agree with them. I'm not going to counter that because they're an adult. I'm not going, as I got older, me and his views do not align. The simple way of saying that. They just don't. So I started to kind of be like, why are you doing that? And he would get on me. And it slowly turned into like arguments every day after school. I would just stay in my room. And, there's a level of when you say like, oh, obviously it's a guardian and not your parents. There was never a fulfillment of that void. It was, this is my uncle. He never felt like my dad, and his wife never felt like my mom. But that's fine. That wasn't their job. You know what I mean? They did so much for me and my siblings by taking us in and giving us that place, and I'll forever be grateful to them. I think as I got older, there was just a lot of things that happened that I didn't agree with, and we grew apart. But yeah, I would always be thankful to them. But yeah, it never replaced that feeling. It was always just kind of like, okay, this is where we're at now, and this is, thankfully we had them and we didn't have to go into the foster care system or anything like that, because I can't even imagine what would have happened then. But right. Yeah.
So did they ever like mention like, hey, maybe you should see a therapist after something this?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that was your question.
There's a lot of questions.
So when my parents first died, we did like a group therapy thing, right? With this therapist who came, talked to all my siblings, and me and the brother who's closest to me in age, same as Gabe, and we are like twins. We look alike, we think alike, and he deals with things very similar to me. We just don't like to talk about it. And so she was just not a good therapist. She pretty much in essence told me to move on, and I'm 12, like, what? My parents just, what are you talking about? So that kind of turned me off to therapy. After like the beginning of my senior year, after all of that had gone on with my mental health, they kind of forced it on me. Like they were like, you need to go see this person and talk. At first, it wasn't really working because I wasn't open to it. So I was just kind of sitting there like, I don't know you. You're getting paid to listen to me, and this doesn't feel comfortable. You know what I mean? As I started to actually embrace the process and like open up more and be like, okay, I have to be here every week. Like I get dropped off, I have to be here. So I might as well try and get something out of it. That's what really helped me in that time. She like completely, I give her a ton of credit for getting me out of that mental space. As I got older, I didn't really mesh as well with her anymore. Like, I don't know, it just happens with people. So I stopped going to therapy. About a year ago or so, I got back into it. I think therapy is an amazing thing. I think there's a lot of stereotypes behind therapy that's like, oh, you just are messed up and you have problems if you have to go to therapy, which I don't agree with. I think every person should be in therapy because it helps you kind of analyze yourself and become the best version of yourself for whoever you're in contact with, whether you're in a relationship or friendships or family or whatever. It's what really has helped me be like, okay, this is what I believe, not because somebody else believes it or whatever, and it's helped me cope with a lot of stuff. So I'm very pro therapy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am very similar to you where I don't like crying in front of people. Like I get really embarrassed if I have to cry in front of somebody. It's just, how I grew up, just being afraid to cry because it's kind of like, oh, is this a weakness if I'm crying? Like, do people see me as vulnerable? Are they going to take advantage of me because they think that I'm too emotional or something like that? Just like a fucked up way of thinking. So I internalize a lot, even now, to this day. I know I'm much wiser and smarter now, but there's still things where I just sit with it and get inside my head and don't talk to anybody. And I'm like, nobody could possibly understand what I'm thinking right now. If I tried to explain it to someone, they're going to be judgmental. They're going to miss the point. They're not going to be able to help me. It's just like a lot of negative self-talk.
Yeah.
So I only decided, I started therapy. I've been very inconsistent. So I gave therapy a chance like in 2017, went for like a few sessions and like didn't like it. And I was like, okay, well, this did nothing for me.
Yeah.
And then I got to a really dark place again where I was like, okay, well, I have no choice because I'm scared of where I'm going to go if something doesn't change. So I guess I'll try to find a therapist, which is the hardest thing to do when you don't have energy to do anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's a cycle. It's like this fucking snowball effect that you can't get out of, where it's like everything takes energy. I have no energy. And then you just sit with this little bad energy that you do have, and you just eat yourself up. Yeah. So I went and I saw another therapist in 2018. Didn't like her at all. Didn't feel like I was getting anything. Felt like our personalities just didn't match. Felt like she was giving me these exercises to do that she read in a book and was not catered to me. She probably gives it to all of her clients. And I felt like, okay, well, my insurance changed. I couldn't go see her anymore. And I was like, well, I'm just not going to go anymore. And then I got to a really dark place. Like, every time, and this is what kind of scares me about grief and like trauma and everything, it's like every time I think I've seen the worst of it, I haven't. Like, it can go deeper. It can go further than that. And I got to a place where I was just really scared of myself, to be honest. Like, I had just didn't know what version of myself I had become, but I just knew that I didn't enjoy life anymore. Like, I was just like laying in bed like, this fucking sucks. Like, it was like agonizing to even wake up in the morning. It was like, I just want to stay asleep, So I was like, if I'm not going to kill myself, then I have to do something. So I found a therapist. I actually went like therapist shopping is what I called it. So like the other times I had just picked the first person that I saw.
Yeah.
And this time I was like, okay, well, I've had 2 experiences that weren't that great. So let me go to a few different people and feel it out and see which ones I like. And that was good for me because, basically my point in saying this is there are a lot of people that I know that are like, that's not for me. Like, I can't do that. I'm not a person who can open up like that. They're a stranger. And it's like, you probably haven't had enough experiences with it. There is somebody out there for you, but you're right in saying if you go into it like closed off, saying this isn't going to help me, you're not going to help me, you're going to make that a reality. It's like a psychological fact. It's called, it's slipping my mind right now, but literally, people are responding in a way, they're responding to you because you're displaying a certain behavior. So you're making it happen. Like, you're creating that situation. It might not have otherwise been there had you gone in open-minded. You know what I mean? Right. So I think it's good that you kind of stuck with it and gave it a chance, even when you didn't want to, because, look what it opened up into, like what it turned into. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I'm still a very closed off person to that point. Like, for people who think that it's, I don't like talking about my feelings and that's weak and whatever, I don't let people in still. I'm very nice and welcoming to people, but when it comes to myself and like getting close to me, I'm like, I'm good. Like, but very small select people who I would consider close to me. And that's just how I like to live my life. But I think if you can't deal with your stuff, it turns into something way bigger than what it is. So what you're saying about it getting darker and darker and darker, people think, I can't talk about this or I can't work this out because that's just not me. I don't talk about my stuff. It's almost looked at as like weak or this or that. But if you don't, it only just spirals out of control and it becomes way worse than it would have been if you can just open up to one person. You know what I mean? But I think finding somebody who you actually are comfortable with is the biggest part of it, because you're not going to be able to open up to somebody who you're like, I don't really like you. You don't really seem like you like me. This is weird. I have to tell you my whole life story. Like, it just won't work. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think the therapist shopping thing is funny, but it's also very, very true. Like, you have to find somebody who you mesh with well.
Right. So you kind of touched on it. I'm assuming that the day that you were, like, trying to commit suicide is one of the darkest days that you've, had in your life. But after this process, like after losing your parents, what were some of the hardest days that you remember? Were they all kind of like together, like all at once in the beginning? Or did you have really bad days that were just like, ugh, I can't believe I'm back here, like throughout the whole process?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of really bad days. I think hearing the story, you would probably think, obviously, the funerals are hard days. And like when you find out they died, it's a hard day and things like that. But I reacted kind of oddly to it. So obviously we said goodbye to my parents, but they didn't like die right when we said goodbye to them. We went back home and they passed away, both of them the day after we said goodbye. So we'd be at home, they'd get the call, they'd sit us down, tell us what happened. With my dad, our cousins, who were pretty much like our siblings, were there, and we all kind of sat in the living room. They were like, your dad passed away, whatever. And I remember kind of watching, and everybody was crying, and I was not crying. And it wasn't like I was sitting there like, don't cry. Like, I couldn't cry. Like, I was literally just sitting there like, I should be crying. And I was watching my cousin Max just bawl his eyes out, and I was thinking to myself, I should be doing that. My dad just died. I should have that reaction. And I didn't. At the funeral, I cried, but nothing crazy. With my mom, I was actually out with my best friend from our church and her family, and her mom got the call. And so we were at like Tivoli Village in Summerlin, and my family lived all the way in Henderson, so it was far. And she's like, we need to get in the car and go. And we had just gotten there. But she had said something to Taya, who was one of my really good friends at the time, and we were driving to the house, and I just knew. Like, I was sitting in their minivan. Everybody was quiet. Taya's mom was up in the front crying, and I was just kind of sitting there. I was like, yeah, I know why we're going back to my house right now. We showed up. The whole church was there. All of our family friends were there. We kind of walked in and sat down at the kitchen table. My brother told us that she had passed again, and I wasn't crying. I was just kind of sitting there. And I remember this time it was my little cousin Colton, and I was looking at him, and he was just bawling his eyes out. And again, the same kind of thought of like, I should be doing that. I should be crying, And I didn't. It sounds very heartless, but I went back and slept over at my friend's house that night. Like, I was just kind of like, okay. At her funeral, I cried like once or twice, but those were not hard days to me. It sounds very weird, but they weren't. Maybe because I was expecting them. I think it made it a little easier. I think the hard days were random. It wasn't Mother's Day or Father's Day. Those days are always difficult, but I wouldn't consider them very hard. The hard days hit you very randomly. During a random activity, you're go-karting or you're snowboarding or you're doing something, and it just hits you like a rock, and it's tough to get through. Normally you're in a social environment or you're by yourself, whatever. But for me, it was very random days. I'd be getting ready for school or something, and it would just hit me super hard, and I would be crying the whole day at school. Wouldn't want to be there, and I would just leave, It wasn't select crazy holidays. Those are usually easier because they're coming. So right. I think the harder days were kind of very unexpected and stuff, but I watched my parents they fought so hard. They were always smiling, always kind of just like, you wouldn't think they were dying if you met them. Like, anybody who knew them is always like, your parents are the best people I've ever met in my life. Like, so kind-hearted and loving. My mom was preaching up until, like 3 weeks before she died, pretty much. Like, she would get up there in so much pain, preach for an hour. So when I think about it and I have those hard days, to me, it's like my life is still so much easier than theirs was, especially I think about she smiled every day. She never really let us see her cry, or knowing she just lost the love of her life a year or two before, and she was going to leave her 7 kids here with no parents, and was still this like light every time she came in the room. So to me, it's like I have hard days, but when I think about it, I'm like, there's no excuse for me to be like this, because that's what I saw growing up was her kind of strength, I guess. So it helps me have kind of a different perspective on it. But yeah.
I guess that's considered like a healthy coping mechanism.
Yeah.
At least they left something with you of value.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, wow. I'm learning a lot, because there's like, you can't, there's no way to know what this is like without having gone through it. You know what I mean? Like, I guess people who have lost someone close to them, or, anyone who's gone through some sort of, like, close death in the family or someone that matters to them. But, I haven't experienced that yet. So, like, hearing it is just, like, there's a lot that I didn't even think about. You know what I mean? And I consider myself a person who's pretty good at putting themselves in other people's shoes and, like, kind of seeing where they're coming from. And there's just so much that I just would not have even thought about. You know what I mean? How did other people respond to your loss? Like, did you feel like you got the support that you needed from your friends, from your cousins, from your aunt and uncle? I know that you said you pushed away for a while and, like, you kind of isolated and kind of created this, like, self-imposed idea that you didn't have support, I guess. But, like, growing up, did you feel like you had the support you needed after this happened?
So it's an interesting question, because people don't, as a human and like somebody with empathy, you don't know how to handle somebody close to you going through something like that, right? So like when I think about it from other people's perspective, like if I had a friend who just lost both of her parents and I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't know what to do to be supportive. You know what I mean? I think there was a lot of people when they were dying who were there and who were like, anything you guys need, like whatever. And I think it was sort of for the show of it. There was a lot of people in our church who would like bring dinners, and you could tell the difference because there was people who would come drop the dinners off and go, like, love you guys, let me know if you need anything, and leave. And then there were people who were like, tell your mom to come downstairs, I want her to see what I made you guys. And she can't even walk down the stairs. So it's like, there was differences in people of like, you're kind of doing this for the show of, look, I made the Conover kids dinner because their mom is sick and things. There was a lot of people right after they died who were like there, and they were like, yes, like we got you guys, like whatever you need. But I think what a lot of people don't realize about death and grief and things is when it first happens, you don't need anything. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to be reminded of it. You're trying to get through it. It's the 6 months to a year to 2 years to 3 years after it happens that's when you need the support of like, okay, the initial shock is kind of gone. Now it's all coming on you and you need somebody to talk to. In those beginning months, you're just in shock of what's going on. You don't really want to speak about it. And that was when a lot of people weren't there anymore. After about, I would say, a year, probably over half of the people who said, we got you guys, were nowhere to be found. I think for people in religion, my family story scared them. And a lot of people were like, I don't want to be around this because I believe in this God so heavily, and this really challenges that, So a lot of people just separated themselves from us, which I get. Thankfully, there was select people who were super close to our family and super supportive. I think I definitely had a lot of support just in my own siblings. Like, I think they're the people who have always supported me through everything because we're really the only people who understand each other. Like, everybody else tries and is there and is great supporters, but the 6 of them are the only people who really get what we went through. You know what I mean? And there's other people close to us who lost my parents and they were their sister or their brother or their best friend or whatever, you know what I mean? And that's a hurt in and of its own. But my siblings are really the only people who get what we all went through. So I think I had massive support system through them, even though they all were going through their own grief and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a select amount of people who are still by us this day, and they're amazing people who helped a lot during that time. But yeah.
How did your because you basically are one of the younger of your siblings. So how did your siblings handle it in comparison to you? Like, do you feel like one person was hit the hardest, or did you all kind of handle it the same way? Or, like, I know you didn't really, I mean, I guess you did you all live together when it happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's very, very interesting from a psychological point of view when you see the 7 of us and this traumatic event that happened, because, like I said, I find people so fascinating, and I've always kind of I like analyzing people. I always do it. And if you see my siblings and you see kind of what went on, it affected every single one of us differently. So you see that kind of trauma, I guess, come out in different ways with everyone, right? So there's some of them who will never get in a relationship. They don't date. They don't do that because of that trauma of that. They may not say that's why, but that's why. There's some of them who are just very angry at the world and just have this anger that comes out in very random ways that you're like, whoa, that wasn't needed, but it comes from that. And then there's others who are very closed off. And I think we all have different ways of dealing with it as well. You can see some of them just don't speak about it at all. Like, if it comes up, they walk out of the room. They don't like to talk about it, which is fair. Some of them bring it up all the time. So it's really just every single person handled it differently. It affected everyone differently. And I think it affected everybody strongly at a different point in their life. So, like, Eddie, my oldest brother, was 18 at the time when they died. So he was then having to take care of all 6 of us at 18. Like, I can't even imagine that. But when my mom was in California for her treatments, he was parenting all of us. So, and we're young. I don't know what's going on. So we're not very compassionate to the fact that he's having to take care of all of us. You know what I mean? So for him, I can't even imagine what he was going through during that time. But all of it affected them differently because all of our brains were in kind of different places, I guess.
Yeah, like developmental
Yeah,
stages.
development, yeah.
Yeah, so if the oldest one is 18 and you were, like, what, 10, 12?
10, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot in between. Like,
yeah.
That's like you're hitting basically a kid at every stage of development.
Yeah,
at that
it's crazy.
Point.
Yeah.
How has suffering this loss, and I'm sure it's changed multiple times, but how has it changed your overall perspective on life in general? Like, do you feel like you're more negative about life, more positive? Are you more, you've said that you're more, like, wary of getting close to people for that reason? Like, in what other ways has it shaped your life perspective?
So I think when I was younger, it affected me kind of negatively. I was very... what's the word? I wasn't very compassionate towards people. I found myself, people are funny. When they hear about something sad or something like that, they tend to try and relate and tell you something about their lives. And when I was younger, I was always like, shut up. Like, your hamster dying isn't any equivalent to this, and it would anger me. Like, I would get mad at people. And I kind of just had a negative view on the world of, like, nobody knows what I went through and this and that and whatever, you know what I mean? As I got older, it's polar opposite. I think I'm just grateful to be alive. I have this, like, it's sad the way it was brought to me, but I have this view of, like, tomorrow's never promised. So whether it's a relationship or friendship, like, I will never go to bed upset at somebody. I will never do that because to me, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to wake up tomorrow, So every time I speak to people, I don't know when I'm going to speak to them again, which sounds like a depressing thought, but really it's very like, I don't know what could happen in the next 3 hours. You know what I mean? So it's taught me to live your life how you want to live it, unapologetically be you, do what you want to do, because I don't know how long I'm going to be here. And I also think it's really put in perspective making, like, the impact you leave on people as a human being. So I saw my parents, they've left such an impact on so many people that to me, I try and be nice to every single person I meet because I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you've been through. When I meet somebody who's very rude and everyone's like, oh, she's a bitch, she's this, she's that, or he's just rude and he's whatever, I'm not rude to them because I don't know what they've gone through to get to that. I used to be that way. I used to be like, don't talk to me. Like, I don't want to be close to anybody, type of thing. So when it comes to being close to people, yeah, I'm still a little weary of it. I don't let people super close, but I do let people in. I'm just selective because, but yeah.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Has going through this, like this trauma in your life, has it made other hardships seem easy in comparison? Or do you still struggle with other things? Do other things bring this back up and it always like comes back to this? Or like how has going through this shaped your ability to deal with other things? Do you feel like you're more durable now, or do you feel like you're more vulnerable now that this has happened?
It's a great question. I think it's a mixture of both. I think there's a level of, like, for instance, you could compare it to like a breakup or something like that. I've always been like, I've been through worse, like I'll be okay. But the flip side of that is it also triggers me a lot. So if do get to a place where I'm vulnerable with somebody, whether that's a friend, family member, relationship, and I start to feel like I'm losing that, it triggers me a lot. So it's kind of a hard question to answer because I think it's kind of both. I don't think it necessarily makes things easier, but I do think after the fact of it happening, I'm able to talk myself. I don't stay upset for as long, I think, because I'm like, you're fine. I don't get as low as a lot of people I feel like might, just because I'm like, I've been through worse. I'm going to live. I'll be okay, But I think in the moment of a hardship or a death or something like that, yeah, it definitely triggers a lot of those feelings that kind of come back up.
In what ways can you see that you've grown from all of this? Like, how have you, obviously, like you said, sucks how any of it was brought to you. I wish that, I say this all the time, I wish there was a way for us to grow without going through stuff like this, but that's not how the world works. So, after going through something like this, how do you think you've become a better person or grown?
Gosh, so many ways. I mean, it is a not a ideal thing to go through, but I think it forced me to mature at such a young age, which was kind of a burden on me in like high school and middle school, because I just wasn't affected by the things everyone was affected by, which led to me not having many friends because I couldn't really sit there and engage in conversations that I was like, not to be mean, but it was stupid to me. Like I was like, why are we talking about this? This is dumb, But it just forced me to mature a lot quicker, whereas now I'm so grateful for that because it's hard with my age group of people, but I've learned to kind of like balance it. I think it's very much my outlook on life and things in general has matured so much for my age that I'm like forever grateful for it. Obviously, if I could take it back and change it, I would. But I do think I've learned a ton from it, even just people skills and like learning about people and different things that they do and just, I don't know, I think it's really broadened the way I view the world, which I think a lot of people don't learn those lessons until they're like 40 or 50 and they start to lose people because that's around the time normally you start to lose your parents or things like that. And then they're like, oh, okay, life's short. Like, but, it's cool to kind of know that at a young age. I think that's a gift for sure.
Yeah. I didn't go through that when I was younger, obviously, but I struggled with a lot of the same issues with not connecting to people. I had a different perspective on life. I didn't care about, like, things that other people cared about. I still, like, engaged in some typical high school bullshit where it's like, oh, I want to be at parties or I want to do this. But, like, by and large, I felt out of place. I wanted to be in a later stage in life because I felt like I was stuck in the one that I was in. It was like, I was really depressed at the end of high school because I was like, I hate being told what to do. I don't need this structure. I don't need you to tell me what classes I need to take, or I don't want to have to commit this much time to extracurriculars to get accepted into college. Like, I know myself better than this. Like, I don't want to buy into this game anymore. And I've just always felt like I'm stuck in my age group. You know what I mean? I work at a day club now, so a lot of the people that I work around are older than me. So I've found like friends and people that are like, closer to being 30 or like maybe even in their 30s. And, you know, obviously being in that industry, there's a lot of fake people, too, that reminds me of, like, high school and stuff. And I can't engage in those conversations either because I'm like, I just don't give a single fuck about anything that you're saying. So I'm sorry, you know. But, I understand where you're coming from because if you just, that's something you can't reconcile. If someone has a different life perspective than you, and it's not, like, it's not out of superiority or judgment. Like, you can't expect people to know more than what they've always known, you know, like I was saying to you before. But I just don't care to engage in it at all. I'm not unfriendly, but I try to give off the vibe where it's like, I don't care. Like, take it to somebody else because I'm not the one who's going to entertain that. I don't care about having that conversation. I don't want to talk about that person or that thing or that event. I don't care. So it's always love all the time. You know what I mean? It's if that same person wanted to come to me and have a conversation about something that they were suffering through or whatever, I'd always be there, like, with an open heart. But until you're there, I don't care. Like, just go do your thing and, like, leave me out of it. You know what I mean?
I think it's helped, too, with, in a weird way, compassion for people where, although it does irritate me sometimes and people, the way they talk about their lives and things like that, but there's also an element of it that's like, you know, for instance, the hamster reference I made earlier, that could be their only experience with grief in their entire life. So to them, that hamster's the same. It's like, I know what you're feeling. It's not the same, but to them, those are things, you know, and I hear people talk, and I have friends who, they're those friends you just kind of have to be like, yep, and just kind of nod and smile, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think it's accepting the fact that a lot of people haven't gone through it. And so I don't shame people, or not shame, but I don't get upset at people when they don't react a certain way. When I was younger, I used to be like, come on, like, react this way to me telling you this, like, comfort me, do this, do that. I don't get like that anymore because it's a crazy thing to hear, and so many people haven't experienced it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think there's a level of compassion as well that kind of I've learned through it with people.
Definitely. I've noticed myself becoming more empathetic to people after I've been through shit. It's like, well, I used to have this life perspective. I used to believe this about relationships or this about grief or this about suffering. And I used to say, oh, you should handle it this way or this is what I would do. And then you go through it and you're like, well, that's not at all how it didn't go to plan, you know? So now I definitely have a lot more, like, it's not as black and white for me. It's very gray. Like, I know now when people are going through things that they're totally different people. Or they're becoming, that's a part of their becoming a different person process, you know? If you could offer a word of advice to anyone who is struggling with any sort of personal conflict or trauma in general, what would you say?
Talk to somebody. That's like my biggest advice. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It doesn't have to be your friends or your family or whatever. It's whoever you feel comfortable with. But when you lock yourself in your head, your problems become tenfold, and they pile and pile and pile, and it overwhelms you. I think being able to speak to somebody and have them put in perspective for you, okay, this is what you're going through. This is how you deal with that problem. Now let's move on to the next problem. And it just helps you, even if you're not looking for them to fix it. Don't talk to people looking for them to fix your issues, you know? When I speak to people, whether it's my therapist, my friends, my boyfriend, anybody, it's always, I just want to talk about this. Like, help me figure this out. How should I handle this? You know, what's your opinion? And it helps to get it out and hear it. Because when it's just in your head, it magnifies it. When you speak about it, it's like, okay, now I've accepted it. I'm talking about it. Now I can figure out how to move on, you know? So I think talking is a very underrated thing, especially in our generation. There's all this like glamorized thing of, you know, being okay and partying all the time, being this fun human being. And if you talk about your issues, you're not fun to be around and this and that. I don't think you should talk to everybody about it, but I definitely think speaking about things will make you a happier person and easier to deal with your shit. So, yeah.
I totally agree. And I struggle with it all the time, so I need to be better about it myself. You know what I mean? I think everyone struggles with it in in some way. I mean, it's just not easy to be vulnerable, but
No,
obviously
yeah.
I'm a big believer in forcing yourself to be vulnerable and getting you. I really do believe you get something out of that. I think that,
Yeah.
like I was saying to you, vulnerability and authenticity attracts people because there's so little of it right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. I
Yes,
think
thank
that
you.
yeah. Thanks for sharing. I know it's, such a vulnerable part of yourself, and even if it's, easier to talk about it now, it's never like fully easy. You know what I mean? It doesn't, like we said, it just never goes away. If you guys want to continue this conversation, or if you have any questions for Faith, I will have her contact information posted on my social media sites. As always, thank you all again for tuning in, and I will see you in 2 weeks to talk more elephants.